this way, I turn out pretty well. These are the skills I want to impart to my children. So imagine being raised in a family where there's no consistency. Recently there was a case I was involved with where the child said that her sister was sold for sex so that the parents could get some money to buy drugs. I mean, imagine if that's your parent, and how kind of parent are you going to be? I mean, so some of that is they don't really know. I believe people make the best choices from the options they see. So when I see somebody doing something like that, I got to be thinking about, they're not born this way, so what's gone on that's led to this, and is there something we can do to fix it? I also firmly believe that sometimes parents want to abandon their kids and they're asking for a way out, and I have no problem giving them that. I'm not Pollyannish. When I've worked with a family for 5 years and they're not moving on the dime, I tell the judge, Your Honor, I think we're spinning our wheels, and I think we need to respect the parent's choice to not go forward. A parent is not going to say, I've never heard a parent tell me, one case I'll tell you, I've never heard a parent tell me, I don't want my children. I've heard them tell me with their feet. I've heard them tell me with their behaviors. I've heard them tell me with their choices. I'll listen to that. I'm not going to force you to raise this child if you don't really want it. I mean, you may be so incapacitated by your own mental health issues, it'd be dangerous to have you raise children. I don't know that I want that. So I accept when a parent wants to bail. I don't mind having them do that. The story I was going to tell you is I worked with a kid one time, and we had what I would call therapeutic evidence that this dad tried to drown this kid, but there were no witnesses. And the way we found this is when I was in the Astrom in New York. When we did play therapy, we used to play room. It was a quarter this size, so big. We had sand trays in there and water, because kids like to play with water and sand. And so this kid and I are working, and I'd probably been with him about 6 months, seeing this kid twice a week for 6 months. And we were doing some stuff, and he said, I want to go to the sink. We had never played in the sink yet. So we're over there. I turned on the water, he had a panic attack. And I was like, what? And he was trying to breathe. Turned off the water, and he talked about his dad trying to drown him. That was the first, he was the witness. So I go to my supervisor, I say, this is blah. He said, you know what? No witnesses. I don't know. Can you talk with this guy, the father, and see if he would voluntarily terminate his parental rights? Just give it a shot. This guy was a volunteer fireman. This is not in Delaware. This is a true story. We went to a bar, and I was chatting with him about how tough it is to be a volunteer fireman, and how sometimes you have to make decisions that are really, really, and I just kept pressing that, making tough decisions for the benefit of someone else, making tough decisions, and we're chit-chatting, and then I start talking about his kid. I said, sometimes parents just really have to make, and he kind of went there and said, you know what, I don't think I can really do this anymore. And the next day, true story, he went to court and signed away. That's the only time I've ever kind of eased a parent out of it. But it taught me sometimes parents need a way out. They're not going to do well. They're not, he would have hurt this kid. Okay. And also sometimes these parents have no sense of urgency. It's like, you've been working on this for a year. Oh, I think next week I'm going to get a job. Okay, so why don't people follow their treatment plan? Well, sometimes there's factors that would make it difficult. What is an environmental factor that makes following treatment plans really hard for the people we work with? Transportation. That's a real issue. The amount of homelessness that we have in Delaware right now is pretty scary, and the number of people that don't have well enough paying jobs to get their own transportation, and the minimal amount of public transportation available for folks in Sussex County is a really serious problem for people getting their kids to the doctor. I know the social workers always say, call me, but that's not really a good solution. I mean, eventually, if these parents are going to be independently raising their children, they have to find some answer to that, some solution to the transportation issue. And again, their own history may make them not feel like it's very important. I never went to the doctor, and that's probably true. So I don't see, recently there was a case where the mother was saying, I don't want my kid to be immunized. And I know that there are some people that have beliefs, they would support that. The problem was she couldn't articulate why. So I said, I don't want to audit her. I'll support you if you can tell me why you don't want immunization. But she really could not do that. So I think there was some other agenda going on there. I don't know what it was, but. So I checked other states about checklists that they use for questions. This is kind of how do we know what to ask. So one of the questions from Arizona was, based on your interview or evaluation, what's the quality of the child-parent relationship? So what's wrong with that question? You can't measure quality. It's an opinion, yeah. So no psychological tests measure parenting skills, they measure knowledge. I'm going to go through these next ones kind of quick because my time's coming up. Even if you do observations, which I've done, a good attorney can say, I probably should raise the issue. Dr. Zingaro, how long did you observe that parent with that kid? 1 hour. Dr. Zingaro, you're going to tell me from watching that child for 1 hour that you now have this opinion about the parent-child interaction? Yeah, that's all I had, 1 hour. I mean, when we do attachment or bonding studies, which I've been asked to do, a good one will cost about $20,000. Now you can tell me who's going to pay me $20,000. It's like 10 hours of interviewing. I mean, there's standards for this stuff. It's not feasible. So we do the best we can with what we got, and ultimately the judge decides if it's good enough. So what next is a good question or a bad question? Good questions lend themselves to empirical evaluation. It can be measured. What's the client's current level of intellectual development? I can measure that. What effect, if any, might it have on their compliance with the treatment plan? I can go from that measurement to an extrapolation of, oh, if they can't understand abstract reasoning skills, they're going to have problems with the treatment plan because it requires that. I can make those judgments. I have had, this is why I do the trainings at DFS, one of the questions, the client acts dumb, is he? Don't ask a question like that. Let's kind of frame it in a more respectful way. I get what you want, but I don't want to report that. Okay. Good questions are related to current legal issues. So they might ask about risk, low, medium, high versus a prediction. Now, sometimes the questions the social workers ask are really talking about prediction, but I just kind of go to a risk issue. Poor questions asked for support of a judgment. I had someone tell me one time, one of the questions, do you think he's a game player? I said, I can't do that. We have to rephrase this in a different way about you think he's manipulating, you think he's being dishonest, something like that. So these are the series of questions. These are kind of the standard ones. Again, you probably have seen these in my report, so I won't spend a lot of time going through these. But basically, it's, is there a mental health issue, and is it affecting this parenting, the treatment plan, and what can we do about it? So what are the risk factors here? Yeah, so one of the risk factors may be who they're living with, how they were raised themselves, that type of thing. Protective factors. So what do you guys do? You bring your observations to the court. Again, you're kind of the consistent part through all this. And you're allowed to bring in photographs. I asked the judge about this one time. Would you allow people to bring in photographs as evidence? He said, oh, absolutely. So the social workers in some of these cases where it's like, they'll tell me, the home was a mess. If we're Sheldon Cooper, like on Big Bang, a mess might be the chair got moved. If we're Felix on The Odd Couple, a mess might be there's horse crap in the middle. I said, take a picture, send it to me. That's what they've been doing. So then I include that in my report. This is the mess, okay? So you are the bridge. You have a non-adversarial role. I think that's why people talk to you more. DFS directors, it's the nature of the job, are more adversarial. They're more kind of, you need to do this, and you guys, as I understand it, your role really is, let me get all of the information, let me develop a relationship with this family, and let's see how we can put things together to make this a win-win. That's my understanding of what your job is. Good luck. Bridging is very difficult. It's an endurance issue. A lot of coaches. So cousins, supervisors, the attorneys, the courts, You're assembling a product. you guys are like sewing this fabric, and it's gotta kind of make sense. It's 10:14. You have 1 minute.
At the beginning, you were talking about the development of the child, and at 4 years old, if it's arrested. Is there any way that can be developed at a later period?
So she's asking, when we talk about traumatized children, that if the child has been traumatized and so these developmental things don't occur in the brain, can it be developed at a later time?
Yeah.
No. So there are critical learnings. An example is feral children are children who have been raised in the wild. Unfortunately, that actually exists. And what they are finding is there's a certain level where if you don't talk to the child, they don't develop language skills. So these feral children, 12, 13, don't talk, or they still walk on all fours. I mean, the brain is going to what creates survival. So if there's no need for speech because you're being raised by pigs, which has happened, or dogs, you don't develop that. Why would the brain waste its time on it? So, you know, when you're born, your brain is capable of learning every single language that we know of. Why doesn't it continue to have like if somebody spoke Chinese, I would probably think, oh, they're all saying the same thing. I would lose the nuances of all the sounds in Chinese because my ear doesn't hear that. So similarly, the brain says, Joe, you're not being raised in China and you don't need that skill. I'm going to devote all that energy to some other part, and that's what happens. Caesar Rodney School District has what's called a language immersion program. My grandson's in it. He's in 2nd grade. He will be fluent in Spanish by 5th grade. And these kids are learning Chinese. By 5th grade, they will be fluent in Chinese. That's amazing. And he thinks nothing of it. I talked to him, I said, Ethan, and he was rattling stuff off. I mean, some of his subjects are taught in Spanish. Last year he had science in Spanish, and he got it. His little brain was like, oh, not a big deal. Sure.
At what point does that cease, denigrate, or it gets smaller or cease to exist?
So if you try to pick up a language after age 7, you probably will not have the correct accent. If you hear a language before age 7, you'll be able to hear the accents. Here's an example. I can speak this many Italian words, but I can read it with the correct accent because when I was a kid, all my grandparents and my parents spoke Italian. Now, they didn't want to teach us Italian because we were going to be Americans. So, unfortunately, we didn't learn Italian. But if you give me a book, I could fake it. You would think, oh, I'm in Milan. But I can't do that with German, Chinese, even if you give me the pronunciation, because I never heard that. If you learn a language after age 7, you can learn it. But think about adults that may be interviewed on TV, a news program, and they're speaking English, and you can tell that person is not born here. They know English, and they speak it well. Henry Kissinger, okay? Think about that. You knew he was not born in America, and his primary language was not English, but the guy was a genius. I mean, okay? So after age 7, you probably can't pick up the ability to learn the accent. You can always learn a language. They think even at your 60s, but the problem is the longer you wait, the more mechanical it becomes. Here's an example.
Maybe, for someone to have custody of a baby.
So there were some studies done in Canada, and they were studying mothers who had very limited intellectual abilities, so basically measure IQs of 70 or less. And what they had noticed is when they followed these people in a natural experiment, is they had children who were also mentally handicapped. So they decided, and you understand, there are certain things people with an average intelligence do that people with a sub-average intelligence do not do because they're not primed for it. How else to say this? When my grandkids come over, I stimulate them, I interact with them, I talk with them. If my IQ was lower, I might not know to do that. I love my grandchildren as much as anyone else, but if my IQ is 65, I I don't know that I'm supposed to look them in the eye, approach them really carefully, I don't know to do that. But see, I have a need to do that. So if you're normal IQ or above, you literally have the need to do that. You want to hold your baby, you want to have a kid look at you and go, that's a need. These folks do not have that need. Anyhow, so what they did was, they took another cohort of mothers, low IQs, and they put their kids in special nursery schools. Most of those kids had average IQs. So the intellectual disability, think about this, was not genetic, it was environmental. So think about that when we look at our school systems and how many children are suffering, and it's like, oh, is that a gene? Or they weren't stimulated enough that their brains would develop those things. I mean, our house looks like a library. We always have books. We have for our children, we have for our grandchildren. I'm gonna brag a little bit. My granddaughter, who was 2 years in March, is sitting on the back porch with my wife, and a leaf fell down from our tree. And it was half green, half red. She said, that leaf is turning colors.
She said what?
That leaf is turning colors. A genius. Now she's. But my guess is, somehow, because my wife brings him to the library once a week, she's heard that somewhere. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm smart. I would not have said at the age of 2.5, oh, the leaf's turning. I'm not sure I could have said it last year. I don't notice things a lot. But these children are they're learning machines. But that means they have to be exposed to that. My wife took both kids, we have a 2 to 3-year-old grandchild and the older ones, to the library around Thanksgiving. They brought a turkey in. This turkey was bigger than them. It was so cool. They got to touch the turkey and all that. The librarian brought in a guitar and said, I'd like to play some music for you today and sing. This is I'm going to say it was May. What song would you like to sing? And my 3-year-old raised his hand and said, Jingle Bells? and so the guitar teacher said, who else? Well, nobody else is talking. And he stood up and said, I really like Jingle Bells. They sang Jingle Bells in the library. And that's what he wanted.
So you're really for early childhood development.
It's not that I'm for it. Think about caveman. Do you think in caveman days, parents decided, let's not teach the kid anything until he's 5. Immediate. This is what's safe. This is what's not safe. This is how you do things. Why did we postpone education? We thought the kids needed a break. That's as dumb as telling a kid something's work. To a child, everything is play. Why do we have to create this artificial? You want to help me run the vacuum? That's work. What are you doing? Kids love to run vacuums. They love to help with laundry. They like to help with dishes. They want to be like us. So when we start labeling things that they don't want to do, we're setting ourselves up. Why are we doing that stuff? So early childhood education is the given. Why would we avoid it?
I know. I really see it in what we do.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
When you're doing your evaluations,
Yes.
and you're dealing with pre-4-year-olds, you deal with these little children, is that part of your consideration in making an evaluation because of their age?
You have to take age into consideration. I don't do a lot of 4-year-old evaluations. If we get a child that requires an assessment and they're less than 5, I actually have a therapist that does that better than me. Because
You can't.
we're doing interviews or questionnaires.
Exactly.
Okay. So there are scales you can use to find out where that child's developmental level is, but it's just rare. Often I'll get calls for kids, not even that young, but 5, 6, for bonding assessments. Is this child bonded with its siblings, bonded with the parent, what should we do, and that's based on observation then.
Right.
So, yeah.
So it's sort of subjective in that regard.
Kind of, sort of, yes. I try to objectify it by, I'll do a graph.
No.
So as an example, I might do a graph and I might do an observation for 1 hour. And then I'll click it so that it's in 5-minute increments. What does that mean? At the end of every 5 minutes, I'm going to write whatever I see. So now that brings some objectivity to it. I'm not saying, so what happens if the first 10 minutes, the parent's really attentive, parent's really attentive, and then for the next 40 they're not? And then they pick up again? No. So I need some anchor. So my desire didn't draw that observation. Something else did that's neutral time. Every 5 minutes, what did I see? every 5 minutes with the parent do what they say.
Those are the kinds of observations I assume the opposing attorneys can punch holes in if they so want.
Good attorneys can punch holes in anything
Yeah, I
because
guess.
they're talking about interviewing a social scientist. I don't do
Right.
steel. In other words, if I was talking about how to fabricate steel, I'll take you on it. I'm telling you that steel is 0.7 millimeters thick. I don't care what you want to do to me, that's what it is.
Right.
Okay, but I'm a social scientist, so
Right.
are there errors in observation? Absolutely. So, but good attorneys can poke holes. Most judges aren't stupid.
Let's hope not.
I see judges here trying to be really careful about weighing things. One of the reasons I like to testify is I believe it's my opportunity to teach the courts about mental health issues.
Yes.
Because the judges are not psychologists, they don't have the training in that, and a lot of times they're making decisions based on their gut. I'd like to give them a little bit more than just a gut feeling about something. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't. It's how we do it. Yes?
I'm Carrie from New York, and I'm still blown away by you saying that juveniles, adolescents are on the registry, sexual behavior registry.
So, this is Sarah. She's having to take a pill because she's just realizing adolescents are on the sex abuse registry. What's the youngest child in Delaware to be arrested for a sex offense? 5-year-old. Okay. So, yeah. So, kindergarten kid, his kindergarten teacher walks past him, he smacks her in the butt.
Oh, God.
She calls it. Now, did they arrest him? No. But it was in the papers. He had done this. It was a sexual offense. I mean, give me a break. So what happens is, this is Ron Bradley. People get frightened. And because they don't know what to do, they make the best choice from the options. The best choice is, let's just lock them up and get them away from me, and somehow that will take care of business. Getting people who do wrong away from you is the wrong thing to do because
Right.
they have no motivation to reintegrate into society. So unless you want everyone to go to jail permanently, and Delaware has a gross amount of individuals in prison. Unless you want to do that, and everybody has to go to jail. And quite frankly, we're not far from being arrested for something. I can tell you right now, I'm going to confess, I went faster than 65 coming down here today. Whatever. And, you know, so we all think, oh, I didn't get caught, therefore I'm blameless. I've done evaluations for private clients that are wonderful people who had a momentary problem with their brain and did something really stupid. But these are people I would call friends. I respect them. They have positions of authority. They're in our community. And attorneys ask me, can we explain kind of what's going on, help them? We're all so close. I don't have time to talk. Thank you very much.